On today's Locked On Jayhawks preview of the Sunflower Showdown, Kansas at Kansas State 2024.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Avery Johnson, thanks for tuning in. This is Locked On Jayhawks. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio if you have any questions or comments. And think of every day or catching each and every show. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. We're previewing Kansas at Kansas State Sunflower Showdown occurring on Saturday night on our episode today. If you're looking for the basketball preview, obviously sounds like Hunter Dickinson, Rylan Griffin, some players might be questionable for the game tonight, so that could have a little bit of a different impact. But a lot of that preview was on a previous episode as well. We'll get into the football side of things on today's episode with headlines, Kansas State scouting report, matchups of the game, players to watch, and more on this episode, which is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, that you can get action on the game. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started today. So Sunflower Showdown happening Saturday night game for KU football taking on Kansas State, and that brings us to our first headline. 15 straight for Kansas State. Like, that is the big storyline coming into this one. They've won 15 consecutive games over Kansas. And, you know, there have been some other close ones in there. Majority of them have not been, but there have been other close ones. But it's the one last year that specifically will grind your gears, that will send you in a tizzy, that when you think back of it, about how close KU was to winning, about some of the little things that if they would have just shored up, you know, that one extra play, maybe they come out with the victory in that game, whether it's the drop pick six, whether it's the muffed punt, you know, whether it's a third or fourth down here or there over the course of the game. A lot that kind of goes on over the course of that one that made it sting even more, in addition to, you know, it feeling like that was your year, that Kansas had a really good team last year. So now you come into this one, if you're Kansas, and you feel like Kansas State still has a good football team. They're ranked top 20 in the country, but you feel like your team hasn't been nearly as good as you would have hoped. Now, obviously, you're coming off a big win over Houston, and you've had some close losses that you're probably better than the record indicates. But with as many things for Kansas have gone wrong this season, the one thing that you have the opportunity to do this year that you didn't accomplish last year, or you didn't accomplish the year before, right? Year before, you make your first bowl game in forever. Last year, you win 9 games. You're ranked several times. You beat a ranked Oklahoma. You win a bowl game. You accomplish all these great things. You know, most this year, you can win. If you won out the rest of the way, you would have 8 wins with a bowl win, right? That wouldn't be as many as the year before. You're not going to be playing for the Big 12 title. Some of these things. What's one thing you can do this year that you didn't last year? It would be beating Kansas State. Now, that is a extremely uphill battle to do so, but it's a rivalry game, and who knows what can happen in games like that. So just trying to end the streak, I mean, that's the big kind of talking point coming into this one. Obviously, for K-State, their headline beyond just trying to, you know, beat their rival here is that it's a game that they are looking to win to continue on their path to winning a Big 12 title. And if you're Kansas, it's an opportunity to play spoiler a little bit against your rival. And for Kansas State, you're just trying to keep rolling. They have a very tough schedule. They play a lot of the other good teams on the road this year. So for them, it's very important to take care of business at home. And then the other headline here, Devin Neal is going for all-time greatness at KU. He is, I believe, 73 rushing yards from having first all to himself for the KU career rushing total list, ahead of June Henley. And certainly his season average would put him on pace to do that in this game. But Kansas State has had a very stout run defense, which will make it a little bit more difficult. The last one here is, I guess, and maybe this just goes back into the 15 straight, is the rivalry itself, the vitriol among fans on social media, the vitriol of fans to the opposing quarterbacks, right, for Avery Johnson, for Jalon Daniels. I think the vitriol for Avery Johnson with KU fans has more so just been like trying to say he's not good. I do actually think he's good at football, though. Whereas the vitriol toward Jalon Daniels was kind of all started by a a man to be named or not named, I guess would be the best way of putting it, who started fake rumors about Jalon Daniels and some things that probably he didn't deserve. So that's just, I guess, how rivalries go. And both quarterbacks probably have taken more crap than they deserve on both sides of things. But, certainly they're going to get a chance to have a last laugh at the other opposing fan base in this one. Now, as far as the Kansas State scouting report, they're third in the Big 12 at 33 points per game. It's pretty stacked all the way through, though. Like, you look at Kansas, they're only 10th in the Big 12 in points per game. They're 30.4. So, like, yes, Kansas, you'd like the offense to be averaging more points per game and not be 10th, but also they're only 2.5 points back of third. So, like, it's very easy that Kansas over these last 5 games could average 35 a game over the last 5, and you end up in the top 5 points per game. But Kansas State is actually better than their third place ranking of points per game indicates, because they're not a high tempo team, right? If you play 15 possessions versus if you play 10, who do you think is going to score more points as the offenses are, maybe the one who plays 10 is a little bit better, but isn't just like overwhelmingly better. It's the one who plays 15. So if you're just looking at raw points per game, Kansas State still good at third, but I don't think it echoes exactly how good they've been on the offensive end, because they are first in the Big 12 in yards per play, right? That takes the tempo out of it. And just the efficiency per play, they are leading the Big 12. By the way, wild, Kansas is actually low-key fourth right now. But nonetheless, Kansas State nationally is 11th in EPA, and they are 19th in success rate. So this is basically, depending where you look, top 25 offense in the country, maybe even better than that. They lead the Big 12 in rushing yards per attempt. That's where they butter their bread. DJ Giddens has had an outstanding season. Avery Johnson has had some games where they just haven't really run him, and I think that's intentional to basically save your bullets, so to speak, for Kansas State, that they use it more when they need to. I'd imagine this is going to be a game they use it a little bit more. Passing wise, they're still 7th in yards per throw. So, they haven't been elite at it, but they're still middle of the pack, which if your weakness is middle of the pack and your strength is elite, like, that's still a good combo. They're 6th in completion rate and 4th in passer efficiency. Now, on the defensive end of the ball, Kansas State is 5th in the Big 12 at 20.6 points allowed per game. Kansas, out of comparison, is 9th at 24. So for the same way that we talked about, okay, the offense might actually be better than the points scored for Kansas State because the tempo slows them down a little bit, you could actually make the opposite argument for the defense, that, even though they're 5th in points allowed per game, if they weren't playing, if they didn't have the ability to play ball control and offense and play slower tempo than some other teams in the Big 12, maybe the defense would be outside of the top 5 there. They are 25th, though, nationally in EPA, and they are 9th in success rates. So those would actually tell you that they are really good still on the defensive end. But the reason why they lead the league in rush yards per attempt against, and they are top 25 nationally in tackling grade. They're fundamentally sound. They make good tackles, right? It's kind of what you'd expect from a Kansas State defense. So that becomes a problem, or maybe a worry for Kansas coming into this game, that they are elite at stopping the run. What are you going to do if you become more one-dimensional? Good news for Kansas is Jalen's coming off his 2 best performances of the season. Nonetheless, Kansas State has only been 12th in the Big 12. Reminder, there are 16 teams, so you're in the bottom, just outside of the bottom quarter there, right? 13th would be the bottom quarter. So 12th in yards allowed per pass, 13th in completion percentage allowed, and 12th in passer rating against. So actually, Kansas State has not been a great pass defense, which is interesting because I think of them having, some good corners out there who are experienced players, some local kids, right? Keenan Garber from right down the road in Lawrence, who was one of the best high school players I got to see when I was, broadcasting Free State games. That dude's a stud. And you've got, one of the Parrish brothers from Olathe North. Like, they've got some experienced, good players, but so far it hasn't led to results in the back end stopping the pass, but it has led to results in stopping the run in terms of the overall defense. So as far as the importance of this game, I mean, it's everything, right? I mean, rivalries, I say this all the time, are what runs college sports. It's getting a little bit further away from that the more that we, get into the way that college sports is now, with conference realignment and the lack of geography and regionality to it, and the transfer portal, and you see guys transfer from one rival to the next. It's getting a little bit less so, but still the lifeblood of college athletics, of the fan bases, is still those rivalry matchups. And so from that standpoint, it's everything. But specifically right now for KU, this isn't just, if you were having the season you would have hoped, or right now, let's say you were coming into the game at 6-1. Obviously, this game would be very important to Big 12 title hopes, and it is for Kansas State too at this point. But, like, at the end of the day, if you were Kansas, if you were having the season you would hoped and you lost this game, you would still be like, okay, well, we can still overcome this and win the Big 12. And obviously you wouldn't be happy about that. But now that the Big 12 title hopes are out the window, the hopes of, winning 10 games or accomplishing this or that are out the window. This is everything. This is your season. This is all that it comes down to for Kansas, right? I mean, you want to leave a lasting impact on this year? Beat Kansas State. You could finish season 3-9. You could lose every game after this. It still would be a disappointing season overall, but at least you would have accomplished something that everybody will look back on and remember, right? You can point back to, say, the 2005 season for Kansas, and that team ended up, making a bowl game, I believe, right? Crushed Houston in the bowl game. But anyway, you look back to that year's team, and it's like, oh, that was the team that snapped the streak against Nebraska. Can you do that against Kansas State? So let's get to our matchups of the game, player matchups to watch, all that coming up. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by Prize Picks, the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award-winning winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on Prize Picks. Prize Picks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. And when your picks hit, you can get your money back in as quick as 15 minutes. Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. Join over 10 million users and sign up today. And if you sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play just $5, that's all sorts of money you can use on the Devin Neal over rushing yards, or maybe with Kansas State good defense, you go under there and you go over on Jalon Daniels. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. Each Tuesday, Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineup. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you place your first $5 lineup. That is Locked On College to get $50 instantly after your first $5 lineup by downloading the app today. Prize Picks, run your game with Prize Picks. Our episode is also brought to you by Z-Biotics alcohol probiotic drink. It's the world's first genetically engineered probiotic. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking. Here's how it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotic your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Again, step 1. Drink pre-alcohol. For the best results, make pre-alcohol your first drink of the night. Step 2, drink responsibly. Pace yourself, hydrate, get a good night's sleep. And step 3, enjoy tomorrow. Wake up feeling refreshed and ready to take on the day. Go to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. Z-Biotics is backed with 100% money back guarantee. So if you're unsatisfied for any reason, they'll refund your money, no question asked. Remember to head to zbiotics.com/lockedoncollege and use the code LOCKEDONCollege at checkout for 15% off with Z-Biotics. All right, continuing on with this episode of the show, don't forget you can check out Locked On College Football, Locked On College Basketball for your second listen every day. Thanks for making LOJ your first listen. All right, first matchup of the game, first down, the battle on the ground. So for the Kansas offense, can you get the running game going? You did get the running game going last year against K-State, who also had a good run defense. I think this one has been even better than last year so far. But you had over 200 yards rushing offense for KU against K-State. I thought it was a Devin Neal takeover game. He did his best to win that game for KU. Unfortunately, there were other things out of his control that ended up happening against him. And K-State had the goods on their offensive end of the ball and yada, yada, yada. But anyway, it wasn't a problem even against a strong run defense in Houston. Right? Even though Houston came in as a good run defense, not quite as good as where Kansas State ranks, but do keep that in mind. And Kansas right now ranks 3rd in the Big 12 in rushing yards per game, 12th in run blocking nationally, according to Pro Football Focus. So obviously, you have the horses in the backfield too. It's going to be really interesting. Can Kansas still run the ball, even though Kansas State has been the best run defense that KU has played so far? They're surrendering just 83 rushing yards per game, just 2.7 yards per carry. The second lowest in the Big 12 is giving up 114. So that means they're giving up 31 rushing yards less than the next best in the Big 12. I mean, that's more than a third of the output they're even giving up to begin with. So are you going to be able to run the football at all? Is it just going to be mitigated? Are you going to have more success than anybody who's faced them? Or is it going to be completely wiped away? Like, how does that affect things? But if you're Kansas, you're going to want to continue running the ball. So you have to figure out a way in this one. Meanwhile, Kansas State has a great running game of their own, right? And can the Kansas defense slow down Kansas State? Wildcats are 9th nationally in EPA per rush. DJ Giddens has over 800 rushing yards already, over 1,500 rushing yards as a team so far for Kansas State. And what's interesting is they rank right now outside of the top 100 on Pro Football Focus in receiving grade. I do think Jayce Brown is a good receiver. Like, he's somebody I trust for K-State to be a good player. But I don't think they have the depth of targets. Avery Johnson has been improving as a passer over the last, handful of weeks, 3-4 weeks, you would say. So the passing game has been getting better for them. But still, if you're Kansas, you want to make them more of a pass-first offense because of the fact that their bread and butter, the best part of their game is the running game with Giddens, with Avery Johnson running the football. So can you slow down the run? And yes, part of that is stopping the quarterback scramble, which brings us to second down. Can Kansas pressure Avery Johnson and stop the quarterback scramble? It's one thing on the Avery Johnson designed runs if he's picking up 5-6 yards, which again, you need to stop the run, going back to matchup number 1. But it's one thing if he's getting some of his rushing yards there. We've seen Kansas really struggle during the Lance Leipold era stopping mobile quarterbacks, stopping quarterbacks who could scramble. They did a pretty good job of it last week against Houston. I think part of that was they were a little bit more aggressive with some blitzes. But the problem is if you blitz and you don't get home and he breaks that first tackle or gets around the guy who takes a bad angle, all of a sudden he's home free for a huge run the other way. So how does Kansas approach this? Do they throw a QB spy out there? Do they blitz and just hope to tackle him? For what it's worth, Kansas State is 78th on Pro Football Focus in pass blocking grade, so you can get them. But unfortunately, KU ranks 98th in pass rush grade. So again, this goes back to the idea, can you get pressure? How are you going to do it? Well, we saw last week, KU had 24 pass rush snaps from non-defensive linemen. They came into the game against Houston averaging 12. They upped that number. They doubled it. You saw the pressures go up, 17 pressures. That was almost as much as they had the 2 previous games combined. 6 sacks. That's basically as much as they had as the previous 3 games combined. They ended up with 12 tackles for loss. So it worked out. The thing is, Houston's a different offense than K-State. K-State's going to be able to handle that stuff better than Houston did. Is it something where now it makes sense for Kansas because they showed that on film last week to say, hey, we're going to fake blitz, right? We're going to show these blitzes that we did last week. They're going to think they're covered and then we drop back, right? Maybe that's something that Kansas does. But I think it is in Kansas' best interest to be aggressive, to blitz, to make those chaotic plays. And yes, you're going to probably get burned. Avery Johnson might hit you on a deep ball. You might break away from one of the pressures and get a big run. They'll be able to hit a couple big plays off of it. But I think overall, you can't just let this be a game where Kansas State 7-yard gain, 8-yard scramble, 6-yard pass, 7-yard run, 7-yard run, right? Go be the aggressor in this game. And if you give up some big plays, you give up some big plays. Third down, protecting Jalon Daniels. We saw Jalon have his best performance against Houston. The game before that was his second best against Arizona State. I think that's backed up by the eye test. I think that's backed up by the stats. I think it's backed up by total QBR. I think it's backed up by Pro Football Focus. Pretty much everywhere you look. And it correlates last week specifically. And, it was good against Arizona State too. But last week was a whole nother level of kind of perfection. The offensive line having strong pass blocking games. Well, the difficulty in this one is Kansas State is second in the Big 12 in sacks. They have 20 sacks so far this season. Specifically, that means finding Brandon Mott, who has 7 sacks. More on that in a moment. But this especially comes into play on third downs. Kansas is actually leading the Big 12. Who would have thought that right now in third down conversion rate on the offensive end of the ball? But going back to the idea that Kansas State, 12th in yards allowed per pass right now, and they're bottom 5 in the league in pass efficiency against. On Pro Football Focus, they're 91st nationally in coverage grade. If you can protect the quarterback enough, he should be able to find open targets in this game downfield. And if you can protect Jalon Daniels with what he's shown these past couple of games, I feel a lot better about what the results of those throws are going to be. Fourth down, play clean football and solid special teams. This is one that could go into each and every week, but it has 5 underlines this week for the Kansas State game because KU always seems to be the team that makes the big mistake in this game. And more often than not, that big mistake is on special teams. Sometimes it's multiple, right? You think of Peyton Bender dropping the ball. You think of the drop pick 6 by Rich Miller, right? There are other mistakes as well, but how many times has there been a special team mistake as well? Just go back to last year, right? You dropped the punt. Before that, there was the blocked field goal, which you had trouble with a couple games leading into that one, that was returned for a 2-point for Kansas State, which, they end up winning the game to where it wasn't a 2-point deficit. So I guess it didn't really matter to that standpoint, but it could have affected some of the way that the game was played. And certainly you don't want to be giving up. Basically, that's a 3-point swing, right? You would have had the one on the extra point. Instead, they get 2. So can't be doing that. We've seen it so often with KU, muffing punts, or I think back to the game in Lawrence, and gosh, what year was that? Maybe 2018, something like that, where their return guy had like 2, one might have been a touchdown. Another one was like a long kick return that kind of like iced the game. And there have been so many moments of that. Can you just be a neutral? If you can be a neutral on special teams and a neutral in bad mistakes and turnovers in this game, you at least give yourself a chance in a real way that you don't in a lot of other past matchups with them. And of course, Kansas State has 2 punt return touchdowns this year. They're always good on special teams. They always find a way to be good on special teams. Can you figure that out in this one? One other quick note. I said be the aggressor in terms of blitzing. I think that goes for this whole game. That is the motto for me. Be the aggressor here. You're the underdog. Play like it. Go for 4th downs. Take risks, right? Play like you're the underdog. Play like you have something to go for, because you do. The player matchup here, Logan Brown against Brandon Mott. We mentioned Mott has 7 sacks. Nobody else on Kansas State has more than 2. That tells you that they're really good about disguising blitzes or bringing different guys, and they have a bunch of guys who have been able to get sacks, and it's a good defensive scheme. But it also tells you that there's one guy who's been dominating that pass rush. He is the guy for them. Typically, Ryan lines up against the right tackle. I'm sure they move him around a little bit, but Brown has been good this year. He has a 79 grade on PFF, including 83 in pass blocking. If he can stonewall Brandon Mott enough in this one, going back to our 3rd down matchup, you feel a lot better about KU keeping Jalon Daniels clean. And then maybe you force Kansas State to bring more blitzes, and then maybe you can, exploit that a little bit in some ways. Honorable mention for this, I'll say Devin Neal versus the K-State linebackers, because K-State's linebackers have been awesome this year. Romaine is an 81 on PFF. Moore is a 72. Devin Neal is a beast, and this will be his last go-around in this matchup. He really wants to win, so it should be a fun matchup there. All right, Hawks to soar, pick a prop. That next. This is Locked On Jayhawks. When we're doing pick a prop, we use lines from FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. And hey, NFL, college football, college basketball fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And I'm on there right now. Kansas getting 9.5 points against Kansas State. I think it's bounced between like 8.5 up to 10.5. So kind of interesting there. You can bet an alt spread if you want. If you think Kansas can keep it closer than that, right? Plus 3.5 is plus 186 over at FanDuel. That's at FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Finishing things up on this episode of the show with Hawks to soar and pick a prop. Let's start with the offensive side of the ball. I'm going to go with Luke Grimm. Kansas State's main slot corner has been Jordan Riley. He has just a 55 PFF grade. He has a 49.7 grade in coverage. Now, there's a chance they use their stud safety, which is Marquise Siegel. I'm not entirely sure, which he's been a stud. And if he goes into the slot, the matchup then becomes much tougher. But still, Jalon Daniels trusts Luke Grimm, and in a big game, the trust is needed. We've seen him been going more to Skinner and Arnold lately, but I think in the big moment, you look to Luke Grimm here. So I would go there. Defensive side of the ball, I'm going to go with Mello Dotson. Cobee Bryant played well against Kansas State last year, and he's coming off a 3-interception game. I'm not entirely sure Kansas State is going to throw at him very often, right? Like maybe they throw at him twice over the course of the game. And so if they're not throwing at him, they're throwing at somebody else, and right, they can throw at linebackers and at safeties and nickel backs and stuff like that. But it probably means more throws for Mello Dotson. K-State's got a good receiver in Jayce Brown, but I don't know that they have the overall depth of receivers, right? So if Cobee's taking away Jayce Brown, if he can, then maybe it's Mello on the number 2 receiver as a big matchup. And maybe it's a big play or two to try to swing things KU's way. Maybe he has a favorable matchup in this one, and maybe he can come up with one of those big Mello pick sixes. All right, I'll pick a prop in this one looking through. So I think it's interesting that I don't know. For Jalon Daniels, his passing props certainly adjusted a bit after the Houston game, but they're still not like overworldly. You can get him to have 225 or more passing yards at plus 136. And if you think Kansas State's going to be able to be in the lead for a lot of the game and they're going to stop the KU running game, which they've been able to do all year long, that's really not a bad bet. The thing that could hurt you there would be tempo, and if they're holding on to the football for a while in terms of, just bleeding out the clock. But if you wanted to parlay Jalon Daniels to have 200 plus passing yards with one passing touchdown, you're looking at minus 113 odds. So that might be something that interests you around even numbers. DJ Giddens rushing yards, you can get him to end up with 100 or more at minus 112. We'll see what the KU run defense can bring in this game. Avery Johnson, this is one that I would definitely be going in on. His over-under for yards is basically you can get 50 plus at plus 132, 40 plus at minus 120. I mentioned there are some games where he doesn't have huge rushing totals, but it's just because they've been saving him. This game, rivalry game, I don't think they'll be saving him. And I think he's going to run a little bit more there. Jalen is minus 108 to get 25 plus rushing yards. And same kind of thing for KU. Like, maybe you're saving him in certain games running the ball. This should not be one of those. Then going back, if we're going with Luke Grimm, 40 plus receiving yards, minus 132. You can get 50 plus at plus 118. Maybe even want to sprinkle. You can get him at 70 plus receiving yards at plus 250. And if you want Devin Neal to score 2 touchdowns, is plus 350. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back this weekend. Obviously, we'll have a recap for the KU Arkansas exhibition. We will also have a recap for the KU K-State game. I can't promise exactly when they will be out. It's a busy weekend for me, but we'll get to it when we get to it. And thank you so much for tuning into the show, as always. See you next time with Locked On Jayhawks.